really only a human reading a document can determine the aboutness. Why is it that a human can determine the aboutness versus a machine or an AI? And I think it's a lot of the time it's contextual.
Again, joined by Davey Slimmon, Vice President of Customer Success at Shiny Docs. I'm Jason Cassidy, the CEO of Shiny Docs. How are you doing, Davey?
I'm great. There's a snowstorm raging outside, so I'm happy to be inside where it's much more pleasant. Yeah, and I have a nice hot beverage, and I don't need to go outside for a while.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the fact. I know that your kids are a wee bit younger, but I've got two teenagers who have already shoveled the driveway. So
Nice.
Very, very pleased with that.
Yeah, that's a key addition to the family is the snow shovelers for sure. Yeah. So we've got kind of a couple years to go, I would say, before they're really effective in that area. So I'll look forward to their help. Yeah,
it is transformative when you get to that, especially at our young age. We are over 30 now.
It's true.
Yeah. So every week we come to the table with a story or two regarding content services, documents, files, media, and records. And Davey, why don't you kick it off this week?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to chat with you about, and it's funny, I've been meaning to chat with you about this for a long time. So this is great to kind of have this channel to do that. And it's a topic that's been rattling around in my brain ever since I first heard of the concept years and years ago. But it's funny. It's the sexy, trendy AI stuff that's made me think about it again. And the topic I wanted to talk to you about today has to do with the aboutness of content. And this is a term that somebody shared with me at the University of Western Ontario in London, probably 30 years ago. We had a big philosophical, deep conversation about the aboutness of content. What is something about? And this was at the time, this was in the context of indexing your files, indexing your data, stuff that we now obviously take completely for granted, and certainly something that we do with all of our customers day in, day out. We index their files and we find words on pages and that kind of thing. And that's great, but it doesn't necessarily, mean that you're going to determine what a piece of content is about. And, where that went at the time was in the direction of abstracting, if you know what I mean by an abstract. This is a short, usually a paragraph, maybe a couple paragraphs. In the past, these would have been created by human beings. And then we actually, as society marched on, we got kind of okay at creating abstracts of content automatically. So we could take a 500-page PDF or some big technical document, and we could create from that, kind of this short abstract using sentences, real sentences with grammar and that kind of thing, based on what the machine interpreted the content to be about. And now what was interesting about that at the time was that was all done kind of with tricks, right? It was done with tricks of, we found this many occurrences of this word, and so that seems like an important word. And when this word was close to this other word, that seemed important too. And for the most part, it did an okay job. And there are still lots and lots of examples of this out there today. But what got me thinking about it, and what I wanted to start to get a conversation going on with you, is how that connects in today with AI, NLP, natural language processing, and broadly above that, even bigger brushstrokes than that, this desire, if not expectation, of people to be able to simply ask questions of a computer using sentences or phrases and get answers back in sentences and phrases. And are we there? Is this just something we can all do and take for granted now? And one final add on to that, how do you do that within a company? How do you do that within an enterprise? Because if I'm working at a large enterprise, I want to be able to do that. Right now, I feel like I can't. Where would you start?
Yeah, it's neat. I love this topic, by the way, and it hits home for a reason that you probably don't even know about. Like, it's one of the first scientific papers that I ever had published was under the guidance of somebody who you know really well, May Dent.
Oh, sure, yeah, okay.
Fantastic person who I always really enjoyed. I worked for May for a long time, and then worked. It's not alongside, like I went over kind of more of the services and sales side of the business when she continued on to be a master of R&D.
Yeah.
Her husband, it's Mike.
Yeah.
Lovely guy. I enjoyed the time that I got to work with Mike. He was writing this thing called a summarizer for documents back in 1997. And this was intended to be used for their LiveLink product. Davey, you obviously know that it's just more than anybody.
Yeah.
And so the summarizer tool itself was, I thought, was very strong. However, it was coded. It was coded in a way that, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of the developer. Mike knew exactly what he coded in there, but it was the idea of, okay, content closer to the front of the document might be more likely to be a summary. You looked for term frequency with the inverse document frequency, so stuff that tends to only appear in this document. And when he was doing it, he was only looking at this document. So you couldn't really look at this document in context with thousands of other documents. You were just looking at this document. And he probably had hard-coded in there stuff like if it actually said the word abstract or introduction, maybe it would just do that. I actually don't know exactly the coding that he used. My brick that I contributed to that effort was actually creating an automation on huge data sets. So I downloaded thousands of documents. I identified what I thought should be I used different techniques to kind of challenge what Mike had done, and then ran his stuff against my stuff in these huge iterative processes to check and see how his summarizer would do in different circumstances versus either stuff that I did manually or I coded using different techniques. And we published a paper on all these various techniques that we used. And sadly, I'm not 20 anymore. This is a number of years ago. So I can't remember exactly all the techniques that Mike tried and that I tried, but I just remember working together on this massively difficult problem.
Yeah.
And especially the idea of you're just looking at a document, you're not a human. What are the edge cases? What are the rules that you would use to come up with the aboutness of a document?
Right.
And make it variable too, because you could request of the summarizer, say, give me 4 sentences, give me 3 sentences, give me the one sentence that would describe what this is.
Right.
And today we would do it a completely different way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah. I'd love to hear this.
Yeah. Like today, what I would do is I would go into a document and highlight, like if I wanted a summary of the document, the aboutness of it, I would highlight what I think the summary is in the words that are already in there, or type a separate summary that I think it is. And I would do that 1,000 times for 1,000 different documents. And then I would put that into an AI engine, and the AI engine would look and go, okay, here's the source document. Here's what Jason says to be true of what a summary is. And it would identify the words. Oh, does introduction show up? Does summary, like, does the abstract show up? Do the words that are used, are they actually in there? Or does this word plus this word, every time you have this word, these words together, that results in this? Like, the AI figures that out. And we can go into we don't have to go into the calculus of the AI, but I mean, just know for sure that whenever you got this thing, it just finds those patterns inside of the document. It doesn't even know that it's words. It's just it's ones and zeros. It finds this pattern of ones and zeros.
Mm-hmm.
So it's expert at finding the cases and doing it so much faster than what Mike could have ever written and hard coded back then. And I'm not even saying that he didn't use some what I'd consider to be AI back then, but it's what you could do back in 1997, clearly different than what you can do today. Short story long is even the way that I described it only works for the examples that you provide.
Right.
And it will, when you throw a new document that it's never seen before, it will, of course, apply the pattern and the technique. So if it sees the word summary, it'll use that. If it sees the word abstract, it'll use that. And it'll do the 1 + 1 = 2 of the calculus of, okay, this is my best guess at what the summary of the aboutness of this document should be.
Mm-hmm.
But for the same reason we don't have self-driving cars yet, there's a million edge cases that humans just into it that a computer just can't. So my really long answer, so I apologize for monologuing for 5
not at
minutes
all.
on that.
This is
the
good.
Really long answer is that it works awesome for things that are common. Yeah. The thing that we have right now to figure out the aboutness, we have easy techniques for doing that.
Right.
And maybe 90% of the work that humans do is common. Unfortunately for me, I'm not impressed because I want to solve a problem that's never been solved before. And I just don't, the aboutness problem for edge cases is a tough one.
I love that. I got to thinking about, with regard to the edge cases and with regard to situations that you described where really only a human reading a document can determine the aboutness. Why is it that a human can determine the aboutness versus a machine or an AI? And I think it's a lot of the time it's contextual, and it's what the human is bringing to the reading of the text or the reading of the content that the machine or AI is not privileged to. And that led me to think about thesauri, or actually more specifically than a thesaurus or thesauri in general, controlled vocabularies, which people, they've become kind of unfashionable. They've kind of disappeared from the regular parlance of information management, certainly in a lot of circles. And I think the reason for that is that they come across as being really rigid and kind of difficult to maintain. But I'm wondering whether that might be a little bit of like a little bit of a Rosetta Stone between the machines and this kind of human understanding of aboutness. If for examples I would give, and this is something I did jot down only because I would never remember this. But if I were to say to you, Jason, did you get your semaglutide from the pharmacy or your sildenafil from the pharmacy? And you might say, no, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. But both of those are things that you would have heard of before. One of them is Ozempic and one of them is Viagra, right? I can't remember which is which. But one is Ozempic, very popular, well-known marketing term for one of the diabetes medicines out of there, and one of them, of course, is the other medicine.
Sure.
And controlled vocabularies establish rules for what the engine does when it encounters words that also mean other things, right? So in the case of Ozempic, you might have a document that doesn't contain the word Ozempic in it once. There are no occurrences of the word Ozempic in the document, but the word semaglutide, which is the clinical term for the same thing, for the same compound, is littered through the document. So the document is about Ozempic, but it's not. It doesn't occur once in the whole document. And I feel like, again, a human being, or at least a scientist or a clinician or somebody who a pharmacist even, reading that document would immediately know that the whole document is about Ozempic, even though it never occurs once in there. And I feel like writ large, these use and use for relationships that you have in thesauri work. They absolutely work. It's just that we don't force them on organizations, and we certainly don't force them on individual human beings. You'd need to set a series of machines and robots out to say, okay, go through all these documents, but then in addition to going through all these documents, follow this controlled vocabulary so that every time you see the word film, you need to understand that we're the Toronto International Film Festival. We're not talking about a thin layer of something over top of a solid surface film. We're talking about a movie. Or, all of the synonymous terms and the terms that exist out there that can really trip up, even an AI can be used to determine the aboutness of a document based on this controlled vocabulary. The problem I see of it, like I'm spitballing that a controlled vocabulary might be a way to approach this problem. The problem that I foresee is that putting these together is a huge amount of work. Thankfully, for some industries, there are really well-established thesauri and controlled vocabulary out there. You can actually purchase and buy and deploy, obviously in medicine and in biotech and places like that.
Yeah. Primal in Waterloo here is an organization, Yvonne Couture's business, that has a 5 million data point lexicon out there, semantic engine that puts these things together. And it's fantastically powerful. And it kind of hits back to something that, and I like the way Jim Barnett, one of our sales team lead, describes it. He calls it like multi-vectored approach to understanding content. And this is always news to our customers when we talk to them, is because they're like, hey, can your AI do this? And it's like, okay, there's a nuanced answer to that. Yes, but the AI does part of it. It does the part that we described. Like it's when I was talking about the text retrieval, how to make Mike Dent's job a little easier, use AI instead of having to code all these different cases. That's part of it. But then there's this semantic nature, this lexical nature, this, dictionary, thesauri kind of nature. I'm using different words to describe the same thing. It's like, just because this word doesn't appear in there, it doesn't mean that. You have to just know semantically that, or lexically, that this is the same thing. So you need the AI layer, which is the pattern finding. You need the semantic layer, which is, well, this can mean that. And this can expand to these other terms as well. So it's not just, this could mean this. This could also mean, when I say mammal, it could mean all sorts of different kinds of mammals that you would have to know. So there's a branching tree out there. There's pattern matching. There's intuition that gets layered on each piece of metadata. And the cool thing is our, this 3.5 pound meatloaf between our ears does all that stuff, and we don't even think about it. It just does it. Yeah. And it does all these layered and nuanced approaches. So when we answer to our customers, well, yes, we do it. However, your question was a little bit flawed. Don't ask us if our AI does whatever. It's like the AI is the pattern matching engine. Plus, you need the semantic component because your industry, the words can change and branch. And plus, when you get an answer, there's some nuances and edge cases to the answer that you may have to hard code. Or there might be some rote pattern matching out there. It's completely different to say, I'm going to find a credit card number versus I'm going to find a human's name. One is a very rigid pattern and only has like 10 different variations, whereas humans' names always requires context of the content around it, because a human's name can be practically anything. So anyway, short story long is, I think we're describing that multi-vector approach here, and we describe 2 vectors, and there's lots more vectors out there in order to be able to intuit what you're calling the aboutness as good as a human.
This is what I wanted to talk about. I feel like we've kicked the football down the field a little bit further. What I'm left with, though, is this feeling that for a lot of organizations, they don't really actually need to go that far to get something awesome. Like you can, all these layers that you're describing that our meatloaf between our ears can do, for a lot of organizations, they don't need that level of kind of human perfection, or human intuition, or whatever the right term is. They need it to be better than what they've had up until this point. Because up until this point, it's words on a page. It's, I think I wrote this document in March of 2022. You work on some very basic sort of vectors to use Jim's multi-vector term. But I think increasingly, in the world of, the advent of AI and the commercialization of AI, is precipitating this interest in moving past that, and introducing more of these layers to people's everyday lives. I have no doubt in the world that there are organizations out there who are deploying as many layers as they can reasonably deploy to get what they need done to determine the aboutness of their content and the relevance of that content. But for a lot of organizations, they haven't been doing that, but we're on the cusp of them being able to leverage all that in ways that are so much more simple and straightforward than even 5 years ago, right? So, yeah.
Well, and that's a segue into... Turns out I do have two topics today. It's
cool.
I thought I only had one, but it is a segue into one. Is that so? Because we talk about these edge cases,
right?
We talk about the different layers that you need to apply in order to be able to find the aboutness, which essentially is the end result. Is I want to find some information in the future that's going to help me do something in the future.
Mm-hmm.
That is. There's a lot of theory of life out there, and I'm not trying to be philosophical. I'm actually saying, like, why did brains evolve to the point, like, the human brain has evolved a prefrontal cortex and these more planning parts so that you can plan future actions, so you can plan future movements.
Right.
That's the reason why it exists. And a great example of this is the sea cucumber, which has a brain until it finds the resting place where it wants to stay, and it attaches to the rock or to whatever.
Oh, no.
And then its brain digests itself because it doesn't need it anymore. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about I'm anthropomorphizing this sea cucumber to think about people that I've known that I think they do the same thing in their lives.
Yeah.
I got my lazy boy chair and I've got my big TV. I'm just gonna eat my brain now. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the brain is only useful to getting you to the chair, and then it can be turned off. And it's
right.
So thinking about that. So the reason why it's digests itself is because it's an energy equation. The idea that a brain takes a tremendous amount of energy. The reason why people don't like studying is not because studying actually, I like knowing things and learning things, but studying actually takes a lot of energy. It's things that take energy are painful by design, because if you use up all of your energy, you die. That's how the energy equation works. Is don't use up all of your energy, otherwise you die. So your brain is actually telling it's pain when you're running fast or thinking a lot or whatever. Is your body, it's your defense mechanism saying, don't use up all your energy here.
You can only do so much of this.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you don't have enough energy to outrun the lion or bear or whatever that might chase you later, you're going to die. So let's back off of using it all at once. So energy equations matter. So the idea is, in life is an energy equation, whether people like it or not. So let's look at a quick energy equation. So imagine that you had an entire room of people, and you built some software and to look at every piece of data that you had in your business, and then decide its aboutness and decide what the future use might be of that content.
Right.
So you bought an enterprise content management system and you properly put metadata on everything out there. And let's say there's 10 million documents that you did, or 100 million documents, or 5 million, whatever, some moderately big number that a lot of companies might have. And it takes 1 unit of energy in order to classify each document and make it ready for its future use. So that's a way of doing it. So 5 million documents takes 5 million units
5 million
of energy.
units of energy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like when I was talking to a CIO of one of Canada's big banks just a couple of days ago, and this individual was telling me that like as far as specific types of requests, I was asking, okay, what types of requests come in for your documents, files, media, and records? And one specific type of request, I'm not going to get into the details, I don't want to expose who it was or whatever, but just saying that they get about 200 of these specific types of requests per month. Okay. So let's say, for example, we wanted to use our AI and our semantic engine and all these types of things, plus a little bit of human time, rather than organizing the data at all in advance. Let's say it takes 1,000 units of energy in order to do this search to try to find the right thing that I need
stuff.
right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And
1,000. Okay.
I need to do 200 of these per month. Mm-hmm. So that's 200,000 units of energy per month that I need to do to go and find the right information. Mm-hmm. That is way less than the 5 million units of energy that I spent pre-calculating all that stuff.
Right. So there's no inherent value. Is that what you're saying? Is that why would you bother if it's not that much?
Yeah, the problem is that nobody does this energy equation as far as I can tell. When I'm talking to people, when I ask them, well, how many people are trying to find the right information? How often does it happen? What's the value to your business? It's kind of unknown. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know. I guess we should go figure that out. Whereas when I ask them, okay, how much effort did you put into modernizing your digital storage or moving your stuff to the cloud or whatever? They know they have actually a pretty good sense of that. Oh, well, we brought in M365 and we did this and that, and we moved off of this old system onto Salesforce and all this. So they pre-calculated it a lot. Yeah. What they were left with quite often is an incomplete data set that they've pre-calculated. It took a ton of energy. And now they've got to go back to the drawing board of how do people actually find this? How much do people find it? Whereas they should have started with the question of what do people need to find? How often do they need to find it? How do we make it easy to find? Not where should I store it? How should I pre-calculate every piece of metadata? Start with what do people need to find and how often and what's the easiest way? Because I will posit that in 2024, in the age of AI, in the age of co-pilot style helpers that can go off and figure out data in real time very quickly, the idea of having humans put the document in the right place and put proper metadata and figure out the aboutness of everything is stupid. Don't even do that. So there's a cost calculation that should be done of what's the minimum that we need to do as far as the pre-calculation of every document so that it's at least secure and privacy concerns are looked after. That's the minimum. And then everything else should be thought of ad hoc afterwards as far as how do I find the right information. Yeah. So in what I find, anyway, short story long, and that's the theme for today, is how many people do that energy equation?
I don't think anybody does that. And it's a great call out because I think when you think about it in those terms, it makes a ton of sense for certainly for leadership of an organization, leader, CIO level leader of a large organization, and you're thinking about your resources on the table and how their time is spent and the value of that time and all the rest. I think thinking about it in terms of an energy equation makes a ton of sense. I don't think anybody does that because I think it's weirdly binary for people. It's like, I've got pain or I don't have pain. Do I have pain over here? Okay, that's my problem. I'm going to work on that. Do I have pain over here? No, okay, I'm just going to completely ignore this thing. And so all the focus and attention goes on the thing that's painful or the most painful. Because let's face it, there are probably 10 things that are painful, and you can't deal with all 10 of them. You got to deal with the most painful thing. So I think, getting people to think differently about the energy equation that you've described is the right approach for anybody who's kind of not sure where to begin either, because I think you flipped something on its head there that is so different and unique from the way I think a lot of people think about how they resource their time and their people and their activities, right? So now the funny thing is, like, what you just described also then implies different measurements and KPIs, right? It implies, how, okay, we did this thing that we thought was going to get us a gold star or some kind of checkbox on our, on our CIO's report card or something, but maybe those aren't the right checkboxes and gold stars to be getting. You should be looking at things like, are your users finding what they're looking for quickly and easily? Do they have giant headaches every time they go to try to find something? And what is that costing your organization in the long run, right? So,
well, yeah, like and I think an interesting thing when you talk about the binary thinking, is it painful for me or not? We're so mired in that, is that because I love, and I'm going to introduce sort of a new topic, but it ties it back. It's the Feynman method of, if you can't explain something to me in simple terms, then you don't know it well enough yet. Yep. So try explaining something and get it to simple terms. And that's great. And I completely agree with that approach, is that don't overcomplicate things. Always make it simple for people. Always, keep thinking about it, keep rewriting it until it's simple. However, that doesn't mean that the right solution isn't complex and a little nuanced. Mm-hmm. And we are so bad at focusing on, okay, well, yeah, we have all this data. Well, I'm going to focus 100% on pre-classification of all the data and migration of all the data and users, well, how do they use the data? What do they need every day? I don't know. That's too hard of a problem. I'm not even going to look at it. It's like, no, it's nuanced. It's subtle. You actually have to spend time with both parties, because ultimately, if your users hate it, then you did nothing.
Yeah.
You checked your box and you didn't do anything for the business. And I see that quite a bit. It's like, well, I don't even want to talk to the users because they're just whiny and they don't like spending 1,000 units of energy in order to find what they need. So I don't even want to talk to them. It happens. And that binary thinking. So anyway, short story long, yes, it's definitely think of things, try to simplify them or whatever. But remember that the solution might be a spectrum of a little bit of work over on one side, mm-hmm. of the ad hoc, try to make it easy for the users, while you're doing actually less pre-calculation. You're actually doing less processing, less management of your content. And you may actually find out that you don't have to do any pre-calculation or manage your content, because a little more effort over on the findability side mm-hmm. fixes everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not bad. Change of scenery.
Yeah, change the scenery. Kids just got home. So what's the next topic, Davey?
Well, so I kind of could go a couple different ways, and I wasn't sure which of the two I wanted to focus in on. But I think where I want to go, especially in light of what we just talked about, is this topic that, again, I keep going back to things that I haven't thought about for years and years. But years and years ago, I took a course. This was before I was even really that into computing and any of these topics. I took a course that was in archaeology. I think I wanted to be Indiana Jones or something like that. And if you take an introductory course in archaeology or anthropology, one of the first things that a lot of anthropology and archaeology profs will have you do is they'll lay a whole bunch of common everyday tools out on a table. A hammer, screwdriver, kitchen spatula, all just stuff you'd see in your house just lying around. And they'll get everybody in the class to call out, okay, what are these things? They'll say, well, that's a spatula, that's a hammer, that's a credit card, that kind of thing, right? And they'll then say, okay, well, that's right, these are hammers and spatulas and credit cards and things like that. And then they'll say, have any of you ever used a credit card to clean the snow off of your car? You can't find your ice scraper and you got ice on your windshield. And so, as a last resort, you're like, well, I'll take my driver's license or my credit card and I'll scrape the ice and the snow off of my windshield. And almost everybody's hand will go up. Certainly in Canada, almost everybody's hand will go up and say, "Yeah, I've done that. I've used something from my wallet to scrape the ice off of a car." And it's meant to, in archaeology class, it's meant to illustrate that, if you find a tool buried under, layers of rock and sediment, and you look at that tool, you might make some assumptions about what that tool is all about. But you might be wrong because the tool can't speak and the tool can't tell you exactly what it was used for. Even if, you could look at these things and say, well, that looks like a hammer, or that looks like a spatula, or whatever it happens to be. And this got me thinking about metadata in particular, and about how, there's a similar story that can take place with metadata, in that, it can be used in ways for which it was never intended. And I don't know whether you've heard this story or not. I'm going to, try and make this a trendy, tie this to a trendy topic. But my wife is a big watcher of true crime documentaries on Netflix, and she listens to all these podcasts that are all about true crime. And, that pretty much makes me a listener of these exact same things. And I hear a lot of the same stories and stuff from the true crime that she listens to. And one of the stories jumped out at me recently that I was listening in. I was eavesdropping on something that my wife was listening to, that had to do with a serial killer in the United States who was caught because of metadata. This was I won't go into detail as to the nature of these crimes, and this is a well-known case that people would know if they're into these things, I guess. And this was somebody who had become so emboldened that they started corresponding with the police, over the telephone and that kind of thing. And through their correspondence with the police, they asked, if I sent you some things on a floppy disk, would you be able to use that against me? This is back in the days of floppy disks, even metadata associated with the files that the killer sent to the police contained information about this gentleman's church. And that was the tipping point that said, okay, this file belongs to this church. The license key associated with this version of Microsoft Word is associated with, this is my speaking of, short story long, this is my long-winded way of saying the tools that we use every day, we think are going to be used for one thing, but they could be used for something completely different. And it got me thinking a ton about all of the metadata that we peruse every day and work with our customers on. And obviously they have these immediate and obvious purposes. In fact, we kind of resist the urge to have any metadata. And anyway, I wanted to kick that conversation off with you as a starting point to get your thoughts on whether you've got examples of something like that, or whether it makes you think of something.
Yeah, you don't have a sense of what the metadata is. And oddly enough, this ties a bit into the energy equation that I had before. Like, obviously, for a business perspective, you want to have 100% of the metadata that's available to you. Who drafted the document, when was it, what transaction does it relate to, what cases does it relate to, what assets are mentioned in there. And it's what's the classification, what's the subclassification, which industry and NAICS code does this relate to. But there's a diminishing return on these things.
Yeah.
So certainly you want to do everything that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that's easy, you do want to keep. And then it comes down to, when we think of this crime example, it comes down to what can be used for you and what can be used against you.
Exactly.
And you got to be thinking about this the whole time. Like, I'm very aware of this when I post, when I upload an image to anything, social media, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. There's no way I'm going to upload an image from my home directly to LinkedIn without first clearing out the location information.
Yep.
And I get it's probably trivial for somebody to figure out where I live. I'm not specifically worried about it, but it's just prudent to why, like this metadata is not helping in any way. It should absolutely be removed for some safety and security purpose. And we need to be considering that. Not just can
100%.
we hoard metadata, it is which metadata should we absolutely be eliminating.
100%. Thank you. I'm so glad you went in that direction with this, because I'm going to go out on a limb and say that even some of the most sophisticated, kind of technology people out there are just not thinking about these things. People get busy, people go about their lives. We've all become seduced by some of the convenience that our phones and all these apps and everything, allow us to do, the productivity that these applications and devices allow us to have. And what's lost on us is not just the fact that we're creating mountains and mountains of extraneous metadata that arguably has very little value, but we're creating mountains and mountains of metadata that can put you and your organization at risk. And in the case of the Netflix serial killer, put you at risk of being identified and arrested by the police, right? So, I think it's when you think about it along the vector of corporate security, organizational security, all the rest. I think it's a storm cloud on the horizon that people are truly not thinking about, and that it's easy when here we are in our comfy chairs as software vendors saying, yeah, let's just gather as much information as we can. There's no problem with storing as much as we want, wherever and as long as we want. Organizations are gathering as much metadata as they can at all times because they don't know when they might need it or what they might need. And, I think that the storm cloud on the horizon is that is going to come, that's going to come home to roost at some point for a lot of organizations. And that, that should be part of the energy equation that organizations go through when they look at what they need to keep and what they don't need to keep. Like a good example might be, for example, I don't need to really focus that much on redundant, obsolete, and trivial files, but perhaps, redundant, obsolete, and trivial metadata about those files, or indeed metadata about those files that puts my organization at risk. I think it's coming. I think it's going to be, it'll be an attack vector for unsavory actors. It'll be something that'll come out in the news, today or tomorrow or a year from now, will be, essentially an organization finding itself in some trouble because of a vector achieved through, location metadata, for example.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, like location metadata. It's things like the MAC address on your computer, identifying you, the IMEI number on your phone, all sorts of things that can work in somebody else's favor over yours. It's massively interesting. And I know for certain that like a modern library sciences degree, the same degree that you got, let's say a couple of years ago, they are learning about this, and they're coming out ready to talk about what IBM would call master data management and how you need to be thinking about metadata and all that. And to me, it's my mind immediately, like we gave examples here, while in a sense a little vague, but it's very specific to bad things that can happen to an individual and organization if the wrong information gets out. But it's hard. It will be hard for the modern library sciences person who just graduated to convince their business this is something that it's just de facto. You just need to do this. So that's where I come back to our work that we're doing with like Standards Council, and some of the innovation that we're doing personally and with other companies in order to make this just kind of commoditized. Rather than saying you need to think about this, it should be just here's the metadata management button that you need to press.
Yes.
and it's going to either ask you the right questions so that it solves the problem for you, or it's just going to go solve the problem for you. Like the metaphor that I always use is it needs to just run like virus scanning.
Yep.
It just needs to just show you here's problems that you really have. Here's problems that you should be thinking about. Press this button to clean them up, and you might have a good reason not to clean them up, but at least then you know. And because as long as we're talking about them in these more abstract terms, I feel like we're a long way away from, the corporate solution to this.
That's a great call out, because you're absolutely right that, I'm talking about a dark cloud on the horizon, but the reason why it's on the horizon is it's so far down on people's list of things to think about, and there's nothing that's going to bring it to the front to deal with it at the scale of the problem. And so the only way this works is with, as you say, something that runs equivalent to antivirus. It's not dependent on human intervention or somebody in your organization who's making sure that all of your metadata is scrubbed appropriately. It needs to be something that is done through automation, especially at the scale that we're talking about here. So I think you're absolutely right. I don't think that takes it away from being an issue or a problem. I just think you're absolutely spot on that this is something that needs to be done with a series of robots rather than a bunch of people.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where it's what's the right software that keeps you from being hacked? Right. And there's no answer to that question yet, but there are best practices.
Yeah.
And so, and with respect to this metadata topic that you brought up, I don't even know that there's best practices yet. Like we know of them, but if you ask 10 different people with 10 different library sciences degrees, I think you'd get 10 different answers. Mm-hmm. They would all be similar, but approaches to actually solve the problem, I think they would be wildly different.
Yeah, and this actually would definitely send us down a completely different and long direction. And I know you're probably looking to wrap this up, but you and I have talked for a long time now about how good organizations have become on balance. I mean, obviously there's some exceptions, but how generally pretty good organizations have become in dealing with the perimeter. Right, dealing with the perimeter of their organization in terms of security threats and
it's firewalls and hardening your laptop default configurations. Woohoo, we're secure now. Yeah,
but this is not that. This is the the call is coming from inside the call is coming from inside the house. This is your own data potentially working against you, and that's the kind of stuff that does. It's legit scare me, right? So, I think especially when you're talking about generations of people entering the workforce now who truly don't think about this stuff, because if you think about people entering the workforce now who have absolutely been raised as digital natives from the get-go, born with smartphones in their hands or given smartphones at a very early age, and I think getting that mindset to shift into a direction where, from a security perspective, you're not just thinking about the perimeter, but rather the guts of your organization and the inside of your organization. I think that's going to need to come with a suite of solutions, and this is really just one of dozens of fancy scripts and all these things. They're just gathered by default and collected, and they live with the data for as long as the data lives. And it weighs on me sometimes. Yeah
Cool. So the last thing I'm going to introduce is something that I'm cautiously optimistic about, and that is recent updates to, and this is very technical, but we'll have a non-technical conversation about it. SMB 3.1.1 in later editions now. This is work that I don't know who controls the standard for SMB. It's probably Microsoft. and others. But this is the Microsoft File Share Networking, which, to the dismay of all sorts of people, file shares are still where the majority of file, document, records, content is, even though lots of nice people have moved stuff to the cloud and other places. The idea of the latest generation of laptops, like this Windows 11 machine that's sitting on here, and the Windows servers and other things now support TLS v1.3. They support HTTPS. They support all of these cool web secure protocols, which we've been pretty comfortable with actually for the last 10 or 15 years. Finally, somebody, and I think it's at Microsoft, got a memo going, man, these file shares don't seem to be going away. And they are getting us a bit of a bad reputation because they're kind of clunky and easily hacked, with some people still having like NTLM v1 still installed, SMB1, so plain text passwords and all this kind of stuff. Let's upgrade this. And the most recent versions of Windows 11 and the Windows servers now come with this fully enhanced file share package of protocols that are just the next step in the same protocol chain as what we've been using before. It can just be flipped on, and are now to the point where it's the same HTTPS and TLS. It's transport layer security that your bank uses and anybody else uses. You don't need VPNs anymore to connect to a file share. When we think back and go through the checklist of all the reasons why we hated file shares, is that, like, remember back when you were on dial-up?
Sure.
And a website would load kind of within a second or two, but when you tried to connect over VPN on dial-up to a file share, it was awful.
Right.
We don't have that problem anymore, but people remember that. This was the birth of file shares are bad. And
performance.
Performance was bad. Security was bad. Like, and everybody is like, performance, security. Did you know that you can do version control on file shares now? Did you know that you can do permissions control? Did you know that you can have PCI Express storage that is gigabytes per second? So for our friends at some of our customers that we've been to before, where they go to their website-based document management system and click, I want to open that CAD drawing. And 4 minutes later, they open it up. Oh, that's the wrong drawing.
Right.
And they close it. Well, let's try this one over here. It's now, if you're on the file share, opens up, like, it's literally, you're on a 10 megabit or gigabit network, thousands of times faster. You're not waiting
for IIS to decide whatever IIS wants to do.
Or the database and 100 other things. You got 30 milliseconds. Boom. Your CAD drawing's open. You can edit your video file and scrub over long distances securely, fast. So we've fixed, as far as I can tell, every argument against a file share has been fixed.
Yeah.
I wonder if the universe is going to get the memo. And even Microsoft pitched in and updated the protocol to make it secure and now what I'd say compliant with a lot of the web protocols that we consider to be secure.
Well, so is the last argument then, and I'm by the way, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying, is the last straw man argument going to be then that, oh, well, then you've got to maintain this in your own network, and you've got to buy the metal, and you've got to have the network operations center. Whereas if this was in the cloud and on a SharePoint, you could, you don't have those problems. Like, is it just then that by saying it's a file share, that means you've got to buy hardware and host it locally and that kind of thing? Is that the only thing left? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, maybe, of
course, there are now file shares in the cloud, right? So,
Azure file shares support it already.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's interesting. So, and this kind of comes back to an argument that I've made previously. And I mean, hey, if you want to switch apps, go switch apps. I hope your users really want it. That's all I'm saying. If they like just double clicking on a file, making a change and clicking save, that's type of person that most people are.
Yeah.
Or if they like to drag and drop into something and then, add some metadata and go use a website, not many people like doing that. So what I'm getting at is that even Microsoft seems to be on the trolley. They're making file shares more secure, easy to use. You don't require VPNs anymore. There's a whole argument around it'll take a long time for people to get that. Like it might use the same ports and stuff like that that are blocked because nobody wants, to be able to hit a file share from you're not allowed to go SMB on a network at a hotel, for example, because they just consider that to be insecure hacking and it's bad. So we need probably to back off some old timey security practices in order to make this work. But anyway, short story long is maybe file shares, the E drive or the H drive or whatever is going to make a comeback thanks to Microsoft and thanks to the fact that it works with every application and thanks to the fact that you can do version control, you can do permissions management, you can put legal holds on a document in a file share. You can use Shiny Docs to analyze all the documents and have amazing search on it.
So, and all it took was, certain industries to not give up on file shares. Yeah. And we know who they are. Like, let's be clear. It's legal. It's medicine. It's insurance, financial services. Like some of these industries are notorious for not giving up on file shares and kind of keeping them going forever, much to obviously to a lot of folks' chagrin. But the fact that Microsoft has made these changes is a great thing. I think it's the right call because, the users have kind of spoken in that sense. That's what they want to do. That's where they live. I think I'd be curious to know what, how long historically it takes for the world to stay out. Like, not everybody's on Windows 11 at this point. How long is it going to be before most people are on Windows 11 or above? It's probably going to be another 5 or 6 or 7 years before that's the case. But still, that's cool. If 5 or 6 or 7 years from now, most of the world is on a Windows operating system that supports these capabilities, that's great. That sounds like a fun time.
Yeah. Like, I like it. Like I'm excited about the idea that most people will just be double clicking on a file in their Mac Finder or their Windows File Explorer.
Right.
Just in that, even on your phone, because it's HTTPS. Like there's nothing stopping mobile and every other device from working just fine with this.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head though, because a few minutes ago when you said that there's a generation out there, and I would say that we're part of that generation, that we'll have to kind of unlearn some of the things that we've just taken to be, taken for granted or just assumed to be true for so long. Like, I've never known an existence where I'm going to connect to a file share from a hotel room without VPNing in. Like it just, that would be weird to me to do that and to not feel kind of shady about it or to feel like, geez, is this safe? Should I be doing this? So I think there's going to be a fair bit of unlearning that needs to happen for certain generations of people probably who grew up, having to, open up your file explorer. Oh, why isn't that where? Oh, I'm not on the VPN. Okay, I'll get on the VPN and Oh, I've got to do secure remote. I've got to log in through this tunneling thing. And do you remember like all the tunneling stuff you had to do? And
sure.
Oh my God, it was just horrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it was to make up for the fact that I've lauded Microsoft here. I've said thank you to them to getting there, but it was make up for the fact that they were so sluggish with their awful protocol, an insecure protocol that we had to jump through all these hoops with secure remotes or like Cisco VPNs and all that kind of stuff. But now they're on the trolley. It seems like they're modernizing this amazing technology that has always been good enough. It's always in fact, it's been the preferred technology for a lot of people. It scales really easily. There's no reason why you can't have one view Like you can, through distributed file systems and that very well known, very well understood technology, you can have petabytes of content all in one view.
Yeah.
How would you do that with, how many SharePoint sites would you need to have in order to have petabytes of content easily accessible for
In one
people?
view. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, you don't.
It
So,
doesn't happen, right? So,
yeah. So,
yeah. And
yeah, and it's neat.
I wonder too, it's funny. I maybe this is giving it kind of too much credit, or maybe it didn't go down this way, but I wonder too whether cloud itself helped move this along. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. But like, if I think about some of the biggest cloud deployments that I've been involved with over the years, and I'm sure lots of people have similar stories out there, the security aspects associated with getting users connected, the connectivity piece for the cloud is always so, in many cloud projects, one of the most kind of confusing, frustrating, time consuming parts of any cloud project. There's all these steps and kind of hoops you have to go through for things like IP whitelisting of users and users' machines and users' access and that kind of thing. I wonder whether in some obscure way, whether those learnings and journeys that we've had to go through have kind of pushed this back into, like, enough people saying, gosh, there's got to be another way to do this, rather than, IP whitelisting groups of users and laptops and things like that. So I don't know.
Like it's well, and I think we've done a weird job of promoting what is the cloud. Like, if the cloud is just, I'm running my stuff on somebody else's computer, then it's an easy conversation to have. It's like, I don't care whether I'm running my file share on my computer or on your computer. It's a file share. Here's the protocol. Yeah. Here's the security approach that you take. It doesn't matter whether it's at my place or your place. Right. I'm glad it's at your place. Use your electrons. You can buy commodity hardware. I don't have to hire hardware people. That's great. So I don't want to crap on the idea of cloud.
No.
The scale of associated with and all that, you should have some cost savings. What I'm going to crap on is that cloud doesn't automatically mean that you must use a new modern app with a protocol change where you have to train your users on how to do something differently or convince them to do something differently. Mm-hmm. And I think, and deep down, maybe that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that I feel like this is part of cloud getting the memo that, hey, not only do you need to support the new apps that you thought everybody would want, you also have to support the old stuff, the way people like to work.
The way they like to work.
And that's the reason why you haven't won the game yet, is because you ignored the quote unquote and even dehumanized it. You called things like file shares and email, oh, that's the old legacy stuff.
Right.
It's so bad. It's legacy. And it's like, oh, you mean am I a legacy because I'm 50 years old? No, it's like, I feel like I'm still useful. It's old and traditional doesn't mean bad.
Yeah.
But we dehumanize it. We give it names like legacy thing. No, you need to use the modern platform. Well, what's the modern platform? Well, it's this website that we started building in 2003. It's like, what? Come on.
I feel suddenly very invigorated by this topic, because I'm thinking about my kid. We were talking about kids and snow shoveling earlier. I feel very invigorated by the idea that my kids, when they get to that point, will enter the workforce, and they will shrug and yawn at everything we just talked about, because they'll just say, "Oh, it's a folder. I'm gonna put my files in there, and I'm not going to think about it because it works perfectly and it's secure and performant and all these things." And they will never know the pain that we would have gone through with our tunneling and SSLs and checkpoints and all these things.
Oh,
right?
God. Yeah. I shut down the laptop before the document fully uploaded that I didn't know was uploading.
Right.
It's just, hopefully those days are gone. Yeah. And it is, anyway, and that gets me into, maybe we'll cover that some other time. It makes me think about, like when you and I were, let's say, a little younger and buy your first PC, you're editing auto exec bats and config sys's and doing memory optimization to get Wing Commander to run.
Uh-huh.
And then I heard somebody say, oh, the kids of tomorrow that were born with iPads in their hand are going to be so computer literate. They're going to know everything about how computers work. And I'm finding, and this is a new topic, we don't have to talk about it today, but I'm finding the opposite. Kids just assume everything just works. Yeah. And we're really forced to make every enterprise app like a consumer app because nobody knows how to make anything work anymore.
Yeah, that is a big other topic for sure.
Yeah.
Enterprise Intelligence is a Shiny Docs podcast with Jason Cassidy and Davey Slimmon, produced by Stephen Schunz. Copyright 2024. If you would like to learn more about how Shiny Docs can make it easy to organize your content, protect your data, and make your users happy, visit shinydocs.com today.